And that kind of takes us to where we are now in this Iowa race. So at the front, we have Donald Trump at 52%. Behind him, we have Ron DeSantis at 17%, Nikki Haley tied at 17%, Ramaswamy 6%, Christie 3%. Now, what's notable about Chris Christie is that he did drop out, but we will talk about that in a second. What I want to focus on is Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley tied for second, even after DeSantis made his entire game of winning Iowa. God, that is so sad.
Yeah.
He spent all of his money trying to win Iowa, and not only is he 30 points behind Donald Trump, he's also tied for second against Nikki Haley. And Nikki Haley has not made Iowa her top priority. Her top priority has been New Hampshire, and it shows.
Yeah, so I think we should talk for a second about why did it play out this way?
Yeah.
Right. So I think politically, you have Ron DeSantis, who we agree sits to the right of Trump on policy
I
issues,
would agree,
right?
for sure.
Specifically as a social conservative. So he has to he's trying to eat from Trump on that side, and also to make the case that he's more viable politically because he didn't have to go through all of the January 6th stuff. He didn't try to usurp the seat of president illegally, right? But meanwhile, there's this entire really solid Republican base that doesn't really have a problem that Trump did those things, that are super attached to the cult of personality that is Trump. Meanwhile, Nikki Haley sits to the left of Trump on policy. She seems more pragmatic. She comes off as more pragmatic than Trump and as DeSantis would be themselves. So she, I think, has a bigger kind of slice of the pie to try to take from as far as the Republican voter base. She has more of an avenue to a win, or at least to a greater voting share.
I totally agree. And there are actually very substantial policy differences between Nikki Haley and Donald Trump. Donald Trump says immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. Nikki Haley says we need to let more immigrants in. They just need to come legally. Donald Trump says we need to leave NATO and we got to stop sending support for Ukraine. Nikki Haley says we need to arm Ukraine with as much weapons as we can so that Putin does not win. There are massive, substantial policy differences. There's also some where Donald Trump says he doesn't want to raise the age of retirement for Social Security. Nikki Haley does want to raise the age of retirement for Social Security up to 70.
Yes.
So there are actually disagreements there. But when we get to DeSantis Trump, it's actually way harder to kind of pick those out.
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult. It's almost like Ron DeSantis is taking Trump's dial and just turning it a bit to the right.
Exactly. DeSantis is more extreme on abortion. DeSantis is more extreme on the government's role in education and restricting speech on certain things like critical race theory. But for a lot of things, like as far as immigration, they're basically aligned. Right. As far as, I don't know, economic policy, I think they're probably basically aligned. Yeah. So they don't feel so much different. And at the same time, DeSantis's charisma is about 10% that of Trump's, or negative 10%.
Negative 10%. Dude, Ron DeSantis makes me cringe every time I look at him.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of why he's tied with Haley despite putting all of this money into Iowa.
Yeah, because they're trying to, listen, who's ever given him money is trying to prop up a dead horse here. I mean, Ron DeSantis he does not have what it takes to be a national figure.
Yeah.
I always feel bad for him every time he talks because just looking at him, he looks uncomfortable.
Totally. We talked last week about all of the donors to DeSantis that pulled out their money and started donating it to Haley instead, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is a great strategic move for them.
And a great example of this is how she's doing in New Hampshire.
Yes.
So she's already been very, very good in New Hampshire. Currently, Trump is at 42% in New Hampshire. Haley is at 30%. Christie is at 12%. And then DeSantis is at 5%. Ramaswamy at 5%. What's notable about New Hampshire here is that Christie is at 12%. Well, Chris Christie just dropped out. So it's very, very important that we look into the crosstabs and see, okay, well, if Chris Christie voters can't vote for Chris Christie, who would they vote for? Well, we have the answer to that question. 65% of Chris Christie voters say that if not for Chris Christie, they'll vote for Nikki Haley. And then another 8% say Hutchinson, but I don't count that much. 0% say they'll vote for DeSantis, and 0% say they'll vote for Donald Trump. That is absolutely awesome for Nikki Haley, absolutely devastating for Ron DeSantis. I want to say that again. Ron DeSantis is at 5% in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a very important state to win. Mm-hmm. It is the second state. It gets you the good primetime media. Yes, it doesn't have the or and ah, the ooh and ah of Iowa, but it's important. It's really important. And DeSantis being at 5% is really bad. And so Nikki Haley winning in New Hampshire, especially with this Chris Christie vote that now she's going to be accumulating, she could propel this into a really good South Carolina performance. Not so much in Nevada because their system is all kinds of messed up. But in South Carolina, she could do something pretty impressive.
Yeah. I think Haley really does have an avenue. I think Haley really can win this nomination. There's time. Okay, we have Iowa in 4 days, but Super Tuesday isn't for almost 2 months, right? So there's a lot of time for her to ramp up. Already, anecdotally, I hear a lot of testimonies from Republicans who are saying they're over the drama with Trump, right? They don't, and they think he's not electable. And I feel like as many people as are super solidly in his corner, there are going to be as many people who are completely caught up in the echo chamber of how bad Joe Biden is. And they're thinking about electability. And Nikki Haley so clearly comes off as the electable candidate here.
And I'm scared of Nikki Haley. As a person who votes for the Democratic Party, I am worried about Nikki Haley as the future of the Republican Party because I think she's a very, very effective politician.
Yes.
I think she has a very good way of speaking. I think she's a very good way of making her arguments. I don't agree with them, but I do think she communicates them well. And I think that honestly, she is way more reasonable, and that's appealing to a lot of people.
Yes. She has reason.
Yes.
That's the thing. Even if they're bad reasons, they are reasons that could be plausibly believed by people.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And even if Nikki Haley doesn't get the nomination, she is setting herself up to be a very, very prominent national figure. I can definitely see 4 years from now, if Donald Trump becomes the nominee and then they lose the presidency because of that, they're going to look back and think, wow, why didn't we give Haley a look? Why didn't we give Haley a shot and then maybe prop her up 4 years from now, too? I don't think her career ends if she loses to Trump this time around.
Definitely not. I mean, I think Haley runs again in 28. I think Ramaswamy definitely runs again in 28. If Trump loses this time, the party no longer could possibly back him. So, right? I mean, he might run.
That would be hilarious.
But like they're going to look more and more every time he runs again after losing. They're going to look more incompetent for trying to prop him up. So, I mean, can you think of a Republican right now who seems more viable, right?
No.
So
I can't.
No.
But I will say presidential nominees do come out of the woodwork sometimes.
True.
I mean, Obama's a good example of that, right?
I mean, even Haley feels like she came out of the woodwork this time.
I mean, listen, when Haley announced her run, I was laughing my ass off. I watched her opening campaign speech, and I was like, no one's going to bite on this. I was wrong.